Welcome back. Last year, I made a video showcasing a project of mine which revives the Windows 7 internet games that were shut down at the start of 2020. It featured a mock server which the games could easily be modified to connect to, hence being able to be played again. It was received nicely and many were able to experience these games once again for themselves, which made me really happy. After I was finished with the Windows 7 chapter of the project, due to multiple requests and personal desire to have the project be more complete, I wanted to look into doing the same for the internet games that were included in Windows ME and XP, which were shut off on July 31st, 2019, around half a year before the newer ones. Aside from Internet Backgammon, Checkers and Spades, there was also Internet Hearts and Reversey. I have also observed that most people who have nostalgia of Windows Internet games refer to these Windows XP games, unlike me who had never played them before and only remember the ones in Windows 7. So now that we have the objective, let's see how that was done. If you try launching one of the internet games in Windows XP, you will notice it hangs up and after a little bit shows a notice that the server is not responding. Eventually, after around a minute, it fails entirely. The first step to fixing this was understanding what kind of messages the games themselves are sending to the server to initialize a connection. This is where it gets really tricky, as unlike the Windows 7 games where if you remove the TLS requirement for a connection and log what is received on the mock server, you see a clear and understandable message, the Windows XP games seemingly sent over gibberish. This confirms that the protocol used here is completely distinct from the one found in the Windows 7 internet games. It explains why the two eras of games couldn't share the same servers. Their underlying engines are entirely different. In comparison to the legacy versions, the Windows 7 ones read like a complete rewrite. A primary example of this fundamental difference is found in the Windows XP games, which all depend on a shared host executable, zclanm.exe, spawned by the individual game applications. Reverse engineering the Windows XP games quickly turned out to be a way harder job than I initially thought. Because of the proprietary protocol put in place, I barely had a lead of where to look to even start figuring out the structure of the messages and what it all meant. At the time, there also were two reverse engineering efforts for these games started by different people, ZRev by Rosniak being one, which features information regarding the structure of the games and their network architecture. From there, we can see that they have observed the games utilize various types of messages to exchange different kinds of communication with the server. And this is in fact true. These games communicate with the server in different kinds of message structures, which are a part of a proprietary protocol specific to these games. This made it obvious that reverse engineering the games from scratch will be a very difficult task. However, I eventually remembered that some time ago I had actually stumbled across an old archive repository on GitHub containing legacy code files from these games. I wasn't entirely sure of their origin, but by cross-referencing them with the game's disassembly, I confirmed they were an exact match. This was finally my chance to learn how these network messages were structured. All messages used by the Windows XP and ME games for communication with the server consist of multiple message structures that are sandwiched together to create a full message. At the beginning we have a header which contains fields such as the total final message length and a message type that can be one of the following: hi, hello, goodbye, keep alive, or a regular generic message. Depending on this type, the remainder of the message changes. For example, in a hi message, the rest of the packet contains fields like the protocol version signature of the game client, the GUID of the machine for identification, and etc. In contrast, regular messages include a secondary header that routes the traffic as either a server event or a game event. For server events, the message payload follows immediately. For game events, a third header is injected to identify the exact game-specific message subtype before its corresponding data. In any case, regular messages are finished off with a footer that has only one value, which should be set to 1 to confirm that the message was sent across properly. Before being sent off or read, everything besides the footer in the final message is encrypted or decrypted respectively via a simple algorithm using a key that both sides have agreed on during the initial connection phase. To showcase this, now that I have added the code to process the client hi message, we can now see in the console that instead of gibberish like before, we get actual data. With this, you can start to see why having information about the messages in the protocol is essential, as they have to be structured exactly the same way on the server as in the client, so that the fields match up exactly and sensible messages can be sent to clients and received by the server. Otherwise, the data would consist of undefined or, in the best case scenario, unspecified values. While implementing the network protocol for each game on the server, I concurrently built out the corresponding game logic. This involved handling the construction and transmission of messages, managing state variables, and implementing data validation whenever possible. At the end, this was the result: simple, functional internet games on Windows XP and ME. Now, if you haven't seen the last video, you might wonder how I make these games connect to my server instead of the defunct MSN one. Let's quickly go over how to actually run this for yourself on Windows XP. To start, you will need a hosted instance of an internet games server, which is one of the applications in the project. Keep in mind you cannot run the server itself on Windows XP or ME, as it uses modern libraries that are not available. You can run the application on any computer on your local network that is accessible from your Windows XP machine. Just ensure you download the version that matches the host computer's architecture, x86 or x64. From the GitHub link in the description, download the x86 32-bit package, as that is the only one which contains files related to those older games. After you have the server ready to connect, you simply open any game you would like to try out, and before hitting play, run dll injector_xp.exe, which will go through any running instances of internet games and inject a client DLL, which will spawn a dialog where you can enter a host and port to connect to your custom server. If connecting to a machine on your network, type out its local IP address and only change the port field if you have started the server on a different port. I haven't, so I will leave it at that. Press set and play. I am now seated in a lobby, however another player is required for my checkers game to start. Luckily, as to not use a different machine, I can simply run another instance of the game here by copying the game executable and afterwards modifying a certain field of the copy in a hex editor so that I can start simultaneously with the other. I have linked a document explaining this in detail in the description. Now that I have my copied executable, I can launch it, run the DLL injector, and there we go. Both clients are now seated in a checkers game. As for Windows ME, you cannot get the DLL injector running as it is not supported. That is why I have included a VBS script that you can simply run on your Windows ME machine and specify a host and port there, which will directly be written inside of the game executables, replacing the old data MSN server. Keep in mind this comes with a restriction: the host name must not be longer than 44 characters. Because the Windows XP and ME versions of the games are almost identical, you can play in the same lobby from both versions, no problem. As of version 2.0 of this project, the same does not apply for Windows 7 games though, they run in entirely separate lobbies. Luckily, the Windows XP and ME games, with just a few tweaks, can be launched on all later versions of Windows. First off, copy all the game files over from a Windows XP or ME installation from C Program Files MSN Gaming Zone Windows. Trying to launch one of them on Windows 7, you can see we get an unable to start error. To fix this, we need to register zclientm.exe as a COM server, so open a command prompt as administrator, go to the games folder, and run this command. Up to Windows 7, this should be enough to get the games running. On later Windows versions, however, it is likely that even after doing that, you would still get the same unable to start error message. This means that you have to patch the resource DLLs the games utilize, as due to a new DLL loading restriction, they cannot properly be loaded. More info on that in the document link below. The DLLs we care about are all the ones that end in res.dll, where cmnresm.dll has shared resources used by all games, meaning it has to be patched for any of them to run, and the others only affect the game they are associated with. One way to fix the DLLs is to load each of them in a program called CFF Explorer, then go to File Header. On the characteristics row, press click here and uncheck File as a DLL, making sure that File as executable remains checked. Then press OK and save the DLL, overwriting the original. The second way is more straightforward and involves a hex editor. I will showcase this with HXD. You open each DLL, then modify the exact byte at 0xEF, which is right here, by writing 01 over it. Then you can save and the original DLL will directly be modified. After this is done for all DLLs, you should be able to get into the games. Other than the older internet games now being supported, the server also gained a few additional features. An obvious one is the command interface, which allows for actions such as modifying the configuration and kicking, banning or unbanning players. A config file was added to keep track of server configuration. From the configuration, an optional HTTP frontend can now be enabled, which means that when accessing the server through a browser, you will get a table showing all available lobbies and how many players are waiting in each. Additionally, computer players are supported for spades and hearts matches, spades including Windows 7 matches as well, with their logic aiming to be as accurate as possible. Aside from this, for fun, you can also optionally set the server to replace the usual ad pop-up that the games tend to show occasionally with a custom graphic that has the name of the project, which on click takes you to the latest Wayback Archive of the GitHub repository. I decided on using the Wayback Machine here, as it provides a simple way to get the page to load on such old Internet Explorer version, especially since even changing the default browser has no effect. Another thing I want to quickly mention is that recently a public internet game server was hosted, where everyone could connect directly. However, it is no longer running, meaning there are no publicly hosted servers at the moment. In case of any updates regarding this, keep an eye out on GitHub Discussions, which is the discussions tab of the repository. In the meantime, however, you will have to host your own server to play with others. Overall, this is about it for the project in its current state. For a more detailed look on the development of the project and added features and fixed issues, you can check out the commit history on the GitHub repository. In case you have any issues regarding functionality, feel free to leave those under issues as long as they haven't been reported by somebody else already. Leave potential feature requests under discussions in the ideas category. I hope you have found this video interesting and informative. Remember to like this video, subscribe for more and comment any thoughts or questions you may have. Thank you for watching.